Parallel, GM Echelon, GM Prime. My name is Nan, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of the Parallel universe, just so you can approach it with some more context when the beta for the TCG goes live in the coming weeks. The Parallel universe comprises of 5 factions, and everything revolves around them, at least for now. So in front of you, you have Augencore, Kathari, Marcolian, Shroud, and Earthen, and these are the factions that you have to typically choose from when you're trying to play the game, or just represent based on whichever resonates with you the most. So for example, the Augencore, they believe in augmenting themselves with technology and machines. The Kathari have perfected genetic science and create clones and so on. The Marcolians have military might, they're smart, and they want to take control of the earth. The Shroud are mysterious. They I think there's some dark stuff going on there, and they're kind of also connected with the singularity in some way. So that's that. And then you have the Earthen, who have stayed back on Earth. And I don't want to give you spoilers, but when you explore the lore a little bit more, which is, by the way, presented beautifully in the comics, you'll realize that all of them have their pros and cons. So once you've chosen a faction, you can also read their stories. You can read more about them. I'll share the links and show you where you can find the lore more and the comics. Now let's move on to the TCG. So the TCG is part of the Parallel universe, and it's not the universe itself. It is just the first game that is coming out from Parallel Studios. So for the TCG, it's very similar in general mechanics to Hearthstone and MTG, but it also has a lot of unique, small elements. For example, banking is one unique mechanic here, where you have to choose one of the cards from your hand to bank or to put away in a separate pile in order to gain energy to play a card in the next turn. In order to play the TCG, you'll obviously need access, and I'll show you later how you can apply for that access. But every faction, every parallel that we saw earlier, they all have their own cards, but those cards should not be confused with decks. So decks are separate. Decks are cards that you put together based on rules of the game, and then they become playable decks. Just before we get into decks, I'll give you a quick overview of the cards. So the cards are broadly divided into first edition cards, special edition cards, and perfect loop cards. Just something to clarify right before we get into it. No version of a card has an advantage over another version of the card. So for example, if you have the Marcolian artillery volley, which is a legendary card, as you can see on the screen, if you have a first edition or a special edition of the card, which is it is like the foil version of the card, they both have the same effects, they both have the same costs, they both have the same abilities, and so on. Even within the cards, a very basic guide to the rarities is, firstly, like I said, you have first edition cards, and which are separated in terms of rarity by very easily identifiable colors. So a blue QR code here represents a common card, a purple represents an uncommon card, a gold or yellow represents rare, and an orange and red represents legendary cards. Their rarity is also reflected in their supply. So for example, common cards are typically in the highest supply, and I think on average are about 60,000 per card. And then you have these uncommon cards, they're typically around 10,000 per card. Then you have rares, these are around 3,500 or 3,300 per card. And then you have legendaries. In the first edition, they range between, I think, 800 to 1,000, give or take. And then you have special editions. The special editions of cards are essentially the same cards that are in the base set in the first edition. They're just rarer on account of them having this silver foil treatment and also a smaller supply. So they're rarer, but they don't necessarily have an in-game advantage over the other cards. Similarly, the perfect loop is another type of card. It is rare in the sense that it is a smaller supply than the first edition, and it is also animated. So there's a bit of an animation and less loop going on here. That's roughly what you need to understand about the cards. Then we come to the deck building. So without going into too many details, because deck building itself requires a lot of testing, a lot of playing and experience with the cards, I'll give you briefly the rules that you need to follow in order to create valid decks. When you set out to create a deck, you have to choose a paragon. A paragon is simply like a hero or a team lead for each parallel, and each parallel or faction has 3 paragons, and every paragon comes with its own set of abilities and so on. So once you've chosen a paragon, then you'll have to choose 40 cards. The rules for deck building: The rules for deck building are very simple. You cannot mix parallels, but you can mix one parallel with universal cards. So for example, you cannot mix Marcolian cards with Kathari cards, but you can mix Marcolian cards with universal cards. And then you can only have 3 copies of each non-legendary card and only 1 copy of each legendary card. So in your deck you could have 3 or 4 legendary cards, even 5 legendary cards, but you can only have 1 copy of each. Similarly, you could have 10 rare, common and uncommon cards, and you could have 3 copies of each, making a total of 30 cards. So you cannot have more than 3 copies of each card, but you can have between 1 to 3 copies. And those are basically the rules of deck building. You can use the deck builder on the website, and I'll share the link for that as well. And once you have made a valid deck, you'll be able to save it and use it in the game. So I'll end this video here, hoping that you now have a bit more context about the parallel universe and the TCG. There's definitely a lot more that you'll need to look into and read. I'll share the links again. If you're not on the Discord, please join the Discord. Feel free to ask questions. We have an amazing community, and hopefully you'll be able to get access to the beta and play with everybody else. In the next video, I'll try to cover more about specific parallels and sorting through cards and so on. And I will see you then.